Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into an absolutely explosive era in human history. We're going back to around 600 BC, a time when a massive chain reaction was triggered across the Indian subcontinent. We're talking about a period that completely rewrote the rules of human civilization in the region, taking small, wandering tribes and transforming them into massive, ridiculously wealthy, and highly organized states. Historians call this the Second Urbanization. And honestly, it is a masterclass in how a single, simple technological shift can entirely flip society, politics, and even human belief upside down. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll look at the return of the cities. Second, the iron domino effect. Third, the 16 great states. Fourth, trade, coins, and faith. And finally, the legacy of the Second Urbanization. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Return of the Cities, the missing millennium. So, when we talk about ancient cities in India, we really have to acknowledge the first urbanization. That was the famous Harappan civilization, which was absolutely thriving between 2600 and 1900 BCE. But here's where it gets kind of weird. Following the decline of those great Harappan cities, urban centers just vanished, completely disappeared from the subcontinent. The bustling streets, the massive organized trade networks, poof, gone. And this wasn't just a brief blip. There was a staggering gap of nearly 1,300 years before urban centers finally started to reappear. I mean, just wrap your head around that amount of time. For over a millennium, 0 major cities. But then, right around 600 BC, cities suddenly start springing back to life. Only this time, they aren't in the Indus Valley. They're popping up in the highly fertile Ganga Valley. This massive, unexpected resurgence is the Second Urbanization. But what actually sparked this sudden rebirth out of nowhere? Let's find out in Section 2, the iron domino effect, a technological shift. The ultimate game changer here? Iron. In ancient texts, they actually called it Krishna Ayas, or the black metal, and the widespread adoption of iron tools completely revolutionized everyday life. See, before iron, trying to expand eastward into the Gangetic Plains was a nightmare because you were dealing with incredibly dense, stubborn forests. But once you have sharp, durable iron axes, suddenly clearing those forests becomes totally manageable, and humans are able to push deep into that rich, fertile Ganga basin. And this right here sets off the ultimate domino effect. Step 1, you get iron technology. Most importantly, iron plowshares. Step 2, those heavy iron plows can now easily slice through the thick alluvial soil of the Ganga basin, kicking off a huge agricultural expansion. Step 3, because cultivation is suddenly so much better, you get a massive food surplus. Literally, for the first time, farmers are growing way more grain than they actually need to survive. Step 4, well, since not everybody has to farm all day anymore, people start picking up specialized occupations. You get full-time artisans, priests, soldiers, administrators. Step 5, all these specialized goods and services create a total explosion in trade and commerce. And finally, Step 6, markets naturally form around all this trade. People start gathering in larger numbers, and boom, you have the growth of brand new, bustling cities. If you don't have that initial surplus of food made possible by the iron plow, literally none of this happens. Which brings us to Section 3, the 16 great states, the Mahajanapadas. Now, as these new cities started raking in the wealth, power began to centralize in a major way. We are entering the age of the Mahajanapada. This literally translates from ancient Sanskrit to great realm or great territorial state. So we aren't talking about loose alliances of villages anymore. These were highly organized, powerful kingdoms with strictly defined borders, and we actually see them heavily documented in early Buddhist texts, like the Anguttara Nikaya, and in Jain literature too. It's almost like society was leveling up through 3 distinct phases. Early on, you had the Jana, which was basically a small, wandering tribe. After a while, they settled down and became a Janapada, a localized tribal state. But fueled by all that sweet economic boom from the iron tools, they finally evolved into the Mahajanapadas. This transition was huge. We're talking fixed territorial boundaries, organized bureaucracies, tax collection systems, heavily fortified capital cities, and perhaps most importantly, the creation of professional standing armies. This was the true, undeniable birth of state formation in ancient India. Now, geographically, a really striking pattern emerges. If you look at the major players, places like Kashi, Kosala, Vatsa, Panchala, and Surasena, every single one of them was located in what is present-day Uttar Pradesh. Because of those incredibly fertile plains and the massive river networks, Uttar Pradesh effectively became the political heartbeat of early historic India. It was hosting some of the absolute most critical commercial, religious, and trade hubs of the entire era. But here's a fascinating detail. Not all of these great states were ruled the exact same way. You actually had two drastically different political systems competing for dominance. On one side, you had heavy-hitting monarchies, like Magadha and Kosala, where all the power was centralized at the top with a single king. On the other side, you had these systems called Gana Sanghas. These were essentially oligarchic republics, like the Vajji Confederacy and Malla, where power was actually shared among an elite council, rather than one absolute ruler. Moving right along to Section 4, Trade, Coins, and Faith. New economies and beliefs. Let's talk about the money first, because the huge agricultural surplus let people become full-time craftsmen, making pottery, forging metalwork, weaving textiles, crafting jewelry. These cities quickly turned into absolute manufacturing powerhouses. But these artisans were smart. They didn't just work alone. They organized into shrinis, which were essentially powerful trade guilds. These guilds were incredibly organized. They regulated what got produced, enforced strict quality control, protected their members, and made doing large-scale trade 100 times more efficient. Of course, to handle all that fast-paced trade, the old barter system just wasn't going to cut it anymore. So society had to upgrade its money, leading to a massive economic pivot: punch-marked coins. This is the earliest known metallic currency in India. I mean, think about it. With standardized metallic currency, commercial transactions became infinitely easier. This monetization literally fueled the expansion of massive, long-distance trade routes connecting the Gangetic Plains all the way down to the Deccan Plateau and beyond. But the changes weren't just about getting rich. They were deeply, deeply spiritual too. This same period saw the explosion of major new religious movements, most notably Buddhism, founded by Gautama Buddha, and Jainism, associated with Mahavira. So why did these specific religions suddenly take off exactly at the same time cities were booming? Well, look at their core tenets. They actively opposed the super costly, exclusive rituals of the early Vedic period. They promoted straightforward ethical conduct and heavily emphasized nonviolence. Crucially, they supported equality and social mobility. This was incredibly appealing to the newly wealthy merchant class, who often felt restricted by the old social hierarchies. These merchants just wanted a peaceful, stable social order for honest trade, so they eagerly poured their money into supporting Buddhist monasteries and Jain sanghas. And because of this incredibly tight link between trade and these new faiths, many of these booming urban centers basically did double duty. Take Varanasi. It was simultaneously a massively important religious center and a vital commercial hub. Shravasti became a huge Buddhist center right alongside its major political importance. The truth is, the trade routes and the pilgrimage routes were quite often the exact same roads, deeply intertwining commerce, philosophy, and education, right there in the streets of these new cities. Let's wrap things up with Section 5, Legacy of the Second Urbanization. A transformed world. So what's the big takeaway here? The legacy of this era is that it fundamentally rewired every single aspect of human society in the subcontinent. Politically, it gave us the very concept of territorial states, defined borders, and formal taxation. Economically, it dragged society out of the barter system and into a world of monetized trade and organized industries. Socially, it broke the absolute necessity of farming, which created occupational specialization and a brand new urban merchant class. And culturally, it birthed profound philosophies and religions that challenged the ancient status quo, religions that are still actively practiced by millions of people today. And here is where the final domino falls. You have these 16 Mahajanapadas, and they are fiercely competitive. Over time, through a mix of extreme wealth and ruthless military might, one of them, Magadha, begins to absorb the others. Magadha rises to total supremacy, and the incredible political machinery that was developed during the Second Urbanization acts as the direct launchpad for something completely unprecedented, the mighty Mauryan Empire, which would go on to unite nearly the entire subcontinent. Which brings us to this perfect summary quote from our source material. The Second Urbanization was the result of iron technology, agricultural surplus, trade expansion, and religious transformation, leading to the rise of cities, Mahajanapadas, and ultimately the Magadhan Empire. It really is mind-blowing to think that the simple act of forging a better, stronger piece of black metal to chop down a tree could set off a chain reaction that built massive cities, minted money, spread totally new religions, and birthed giant empires. It makes you wonder, what incredibly simple modern technologies are we adopting today that are quietly setting up the dominoes for the next great transformation of human civilization? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Keep asking questions and keep learning.